2 weeks had passed since their world shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. 2 weeks since the helicopter carrying their parents plummeted from the sky, taking with it every semblance of the life they had known. Pierce Whitmore stood in the executive office that had belonged to his father, staring at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility settle onto his 25-year-old shoulders like an anchor dragging him into deep, dark waters. His sister Maya had just turned 15. 15 years old and orphaned, left in the care of a brother who, until 2 weeks ago, had been living the carefree existence of a young heir, attending parties, dating women whose names he rarely remembered, and treating life as an endless playground. Now he was responsible for an empire, hundreds of employees, and a grieving teenage girl who looked at him with eyes that held both hope and accusation. The family attorney cleared his throat, pulling Pierce back to the present moment. The word that echoed in Pierce's mind was one he would have to accept now. Mr. Pierce Whitmore. No longer could he insist on the casual familiarity of his first name alone. Respect was currency in the business world his father had built, and Pierce would need every ounce of it to survive what lay ahead. The attorney spoke about a boarding school in Switzerland, an elegant solution to a complicated problem. A place where Maya could receive excellent education while Pierce focused on keeping the family businesses afloat. The suggestion hung in the air between them, practical yet somehow cold, efficient yet distant. Pierce asked for time to consider it, watching as the older man gathered his papers and left the office with a respectful nod. His phone rang almost immediately. The housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor, her voice tight with worry. Maya was missing. She had searched the entire mansion, the grounds, the surrounding area. The girl had simply vanished without a word, without a note, without any indication of where she might have gone. Pierce felt his chest constrict. This was exactly what he had feared, exactly why the suggestion of boarding school both appealed to him and filled him with guilt. He was not equipped for this. He did not know how to be a parent, how to navigate the turbulent waters of teenage emotions, while simultaneously steering a corporate empire through the crisis of losing its founder. He drove home faster than he should have, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Mrs. Eleanor met him at the door, her weathered face creased with concern. She had raised him, had been there for every scraped knee and childhood fear. If anyone deserved his respect and honesty, it was this woman who loved him like a son. They called Maya's friends. They searched again. They paced the marble floors of the entrance hall, wearing paths in stone that had stood for generations. Pierce was reaching for his phone to call the police when the front door opened and his sister walked in, her expression defiant and lost all at once. The argument that followed was sharp and quick. Maya had been out walking, she said, as if that explained everything, as if disappearing for hours without telling anyone was perfectly reasonable behavior for a 15-year-old who had just lost both parents. Pierce felt his control slipping, felt the pressure of everything pressing down on him until he could barely breathe. He told her about the boarding school, the words coming out harsher than he intended, pushed by frustration and fear and his own desperate inadequacy. Maya's face crumpled. She accused him of wanting to be rid of her, of choosing his precious business over his own sister. She ran upstairs, and the sound of her door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. Pierce stood in the foyer, 25 years old and feeling ancient, wondering how his father had made all of this look so easy. Mrs. Eleanor touched his arm gently. She reminded him that his parents had loved them both, that they would not have wanted the siblings to be torn apart by grief and misunderstanding. She suggested patience, time, and perhaps family counseling. Pierce nodded, feeling some of the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. He would not send Maya away. He would figure this out somehow. The months that followed were a blur of boardroom meetings and awkward dinners, of trying to be both brother and guardian while learning to run a multi-million-dollar corporation. Pierce threw himself into work, finding in the cold logic of business decisions a refugee from the emotional chaos at home. He hired the best people, listened to his father's most trusted advisors, and slowly began to feel the ground solidify beneath his feet. But the loneliness was a constant companion. At night, in the enormous house that felt emptier than ever, Pierce would pour himself a drink and stand on the balcony, looking out at the lights of the city and wondering if he would ever feel truly grounded again. He dated occasionally, casual encounters that never went beyond a few weeks. He kept his real identity hidden from most of the women he met, introducing himself with different names, different backstories. He had learned his lesson about trust, learned it in the most painful way possible. Her name had been Vanessa. They had met 6 months after his parents' death, when Pierce was still raw and desperate for something, anything, to make him feel alive again. She had been beautiful, sophisticated, and seemingly understanding of his situation. He had let his guard down, had allowed himself to believe that perhaps he could have companionship, perhaps even love, despite everything else. The betrayal had been swift and brutal. Vanessa had not wanted him. She had wanted his money, his name, his connections. When Pierce discovered she was selling information about the company to competitors, when he found the evidence of her calculated manipulation, something inside him had frozen solid. He ended the relationship immediately, took legal action to protect his business interests, and made himself a promise. He would never love again, never allow anyone close enough to hurt him, never be vulnerable in that particular way. He would have physical relationships, yes, because he was still a man with needs, but his heart would remain locked away where no one could reach it. It was safer that way, cleaner, more honest in its own way. 5 years passed. Pierce built the Whitmore empire into something even greater than what his father had left behind. Maya graduated from high school and started college, their relationship healing slowly into something that resembled sibling affection, if not quite the closeness they had known as children. Pierce dated women who knew nothing of his real identity, meeting them in bars and clubs where he could be anyone, where the weight of his name and fortune did not precede him. His best friends, Nathan and Connor, had taken different paths. Nathan had married Sophia in a whirlwind romance that had surprised everyone, and Connor had fallen for Maya's best friend, Elizabeth, in a relationship that had initially been scandalous but had evolved into something genuine and lasting. They tried to set Pierce up, tried to encourage him to open his heart again, but he deflected their attempts with practiced ease. He was content, he told himself. He had his work, his friends, his sister. He did not need romantic love. He had tried it once, and it had nearly destroyed him at a time when he was already broken. Why would he ever risk that again? Then Ariana Castellanos walked into his conference room, and everything Pierce had built to protect himself began to crack. She had been hired by the board of directors without his explicit approval, brought in to conduct an audit of company finances. Pierce resented the implication that his management needed scrutiny, resented the board's decision to go over his head, and resented most of all the young woman who stood before him with fire in her dark eyes and an attitude that suggested she was entirely unimpressed by his authority. Ariana was beautiful in a way that made Pierce's carefully constructed defenses feel suddenly inadequate. She had olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean heritage, long, dark hair pulled back in a professional ponytail, and a figure that her conservative business suit could not entirely hide. But it was her eyes that captured him, deep brown and intelligent, regarding him with something that looked uncomfortably like judgment. Their first meeting was a disaster. Pierce was cold and dismissive, treating her like an inconvenience rather than a professional hired to do a job. Ariana met his attitude with cool professionalism, refusing to be intimidated by his wealth or his reputation. She presented her credentials calmly, outlined the scope of the audit, and made it clear that she would be doing her job thoroughly, regardless of his cooperation. Pierce found himself simultaneously attracted to and irritated by her. She reminded him uncomfortably of his father, who had never tolerated arrogance or laziness, who had demanded excellence and integrity from everyone around him. Ariana carried herself with that same quiet confidence, that same unshakable sense of her own competence. What Pierce did not know was that Ariana Castellanos had her own reasons for being in the United States, her own secrets that she guarded carefully. She had been born in Greece, the daughter of a powerful and controlling man who had run his family like a business, expecting obedience and offering little in the way of affection or understanding. Her father had arranged a marriage for her when she was 22, to a man twice her age who would expand the family's business interests. Ariana had refused. The rebellion had been quiet, but absolute. With the help of her childhood friend Sophia, she had fled Greece in the middle of the night, taking only what she could carry and leaving behind everything she had known. They had come to the United States with student visas, enrolling in university and working multiple jobs to support themselves. Ariana had discovered a talent for accounting, for the logical beauty of numbers and the satisfaction of finding patterns in financial chaos. She had studied relentlessly, graduated at the top of her class, and built a reputation as one of the most thorough and honest auditors in the city. She lived modestly, sent money to her mother in secret, and tried not to think about the father who had disowned her for her disobedience. She had no patience for entitled rich men who thought their wealth put them above scrutiny. Pierce Whitmore, with his expensive suits and cold demeanor, represented everything she had learned to distrust. She approached the audit with professional determination, ready to find whatever inconsistencies or problems existed in his company's finances. What she found instead was a meticulously run organization, financial records that were models of transparency and efficiency, and a CEO who, despite his youth and attitude, clearly understood every aspect of his business. Ariana spent long hours poring over reports, interviewing department heads, and examining transaction records. She found nothing irregular, nothing suspicious, nothing that would justify the board's apparent lack of confidence in Pierce's leadership. She also found herself thinking about him more than was professionally appropriate. He was infuriating, yes, but he was also brilliant. She watched him in meetings, saw how he commanded respect without demanding it, how his employees genuinely seemed to admire him, despite his sometimes cold exterior. She noticed small things, the way he always remembered people's names, how he would stay late to help solve problems, even when it was not his responsibility. The photograph on his desk of a smiling young woman who Ariana learned was his sister. Pierce, for his part, found himself equally preoccupied with Ariana. He told himself it was annoyance, that he simply wanted her audit finished so she would leave and he could return to normal operations. But he noticed things he should not have noticed. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, the faint scent of jasmine that lingered in conference rooms after she had been there, the rare smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to absolutely radiant. He began finding excuses to check on her progress, dropping by her temporary office with questions that could have been handled by email. She would look up from her computer, her reading glasses sliding down her nose, and regard him with that same measuring gaze that made him feel simultaneously defensive and exposed. One evening, Pierce worked late finishing a proposal for a new acquisition. He assumed he was alone in the building, the cleaning crew having finished hours ago. When he left his office, he was surprised to see light coming from under the door of Ariana's workspace. He hesitated, then knocked softly. She opened the door looking exhausted, her hair escaping from its usual neat arrangement, her blazer discarded to reveal a silk blouse that clung to curves that Pierce absolutely should not have been noticing. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, and Pierce felt something shift in the air between them, something electric and dangerous. He asked if she needed anything, if there was a problem with the audit. She shook her head, explained that she was simply being thorough, that she took her work seriously. The words were professional, but her voice was softer than usual, tired in a way that made Pierce want to do something foolish, like offer comfort. Instead, he suggested they both needed a break, and before he could overthink it, he invited her to join him for a late dinner. Ariana hesitated, clearly torn between professional boundaries and something else, something Pierce could see in her eyes that made his pulse quicken. Finally, she agreed, just this once, because she was hungry and it was late, and surely there was no harm in two people sharing a meal. They went to a small restaurant Pierce knew, a place far from the usual haunts of the business elite, where they could be just two people rather than CEO and auditor. Over pasta and wine, they began to talk, really talk, and Pierce found himself opening up in ways he had not done in years. He told her about his parents, about the accident that had changed everything, about the weight of suddenly being responsible for so many lives and livelihoods. Ariana listened with a compassion that surprised him. She asked thoughtful questions, offered no platitudes or easy answers, simply gave him the space to speak truths he had shared with almost no one. When she shared her own story, carefully edited to omit certain details about her father, Pierce felt a connection forming that terrified him as much as it attracted him. They left the restaurant late, both aware that something had changed between them, but neither willing to name it. Pierce drove her home, pulling up in front of her modest apartment building, a stark contrast to the mansion where he lived. He walked her to her door, and they stood in the dim hallway, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. He knew he should leave, knew this was dangerous territory, but Ariana looked up at him with those dark eyes, and Pierce felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. He kissed her, a soft press of lips that was meant to be brief, exploratory. But the moment their mouths met, something ignited between them, a hunger that neither had expected. Ariana pulled him inside, and they stumbled toward her bedroom, hands exploring, clothes falling away. Pierce told himself it was just physical, just a release of tension that had been building for weeks. But as he laid Ariana down on her bed, as he traced the curves of her body with reverent hands, he knew he was lying to himself. Making love to her was unlike anything he had experienced before. It was not just desire, not just the mechanical satisfaction of physical needs. It was connection, vulnerability, two broken people finding in each other something they had both stopped believing existed. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing hard, and Pierce felt something shift deep in his chest, some ice that had been frozen there for 5 years beginning to thaw. He wanted to run. Everything in him screamed to get dressed, to leave, to put distance between himself and the woman who had somehow slipped past his defenses. But Ariana's hand was resting on his chest, right over his racing heart, and he found he could not move. She fell asleep curled against him, her breath soft and even. Pierce lay awake, staring at the ceiling, terrified of what he was feeling. He had promised himself never to be vulnerable again, never to risk his heart. Yet here he was, in bed with a woman he barely knew, feeling things he had sworn he would never feel again. When morning came, Pierce extracted himself carefully, dressing in the grey light of dawn. He left a note on her pillow, something non-committal about seeing her at work, and fled before she woke. He spent the drive home cursing himself, trying to rebuild the walls that had come crashing down in her arms. At the office, he was cool and professional, treating Ariana with polite distance that bordered on coldness. She matched his tone, her expression carefully neutral, but Pierce could see the hurt in her eyes and hated himself for putting it there. He told himself it was better this way, cleaner. One night could be forgotten. They would both move on. But forgetting proved impossible. Pierce found himself thinking about her constantly, remembering the sound of her laugh, the feel of her skin, the way she had looked at him like he was not just a CEO or a fortune, but a person worth knowing. He threw himself into work with renewed intensity, trying to drown the feelings in spreadsheets and strategy meetings. Ariana completed her audit and prepared to present her findings to the board. She had found nothing wrong, nothing that would justify the board's concerns. In fact, her report praised Pierce's leadership and the company's financial health. She should have felt proud of her thoroughness. Instead, she felt empty, because the job was done and she would have no reason to see him again. The night before her presentation, Pierce appeared at her door. He stood in the hallway looking wrecked, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his eyes haunted. He told her he could not stop thinking about her, could not pretend that what had happened between them meant nothing. He told her about Vanessa, about the betrayal that had made him swear off love. He told her he was terrified, but he needed to try, needed to see if what he felt was real. Ariana let him in, not into just her apartment, but into the guarded spaces of her own heart. She told him about her father, about the arranged marriage, about the desperate flight from Greece. She told him she understood fear, understood the instinct to protect oneself at all costs. But she also told him that some things were worth the risk, that living in fear was not really living at all. They made love again, slower this time, with a tenderness that went beyond physical desire. Pierce held her afterward, feeling something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness he had not known he was missing. He asked her to give him a chance, to let him try to be the man she deserved. Ariana agreed, though both of them knew the path ahead would not be easy. Their relationship developed in secret at first, carefully hidden from Pierce's board and the curious eyes of his social circle. They would meet at Ariana's apartment, or Pierce would take her to restaurants far from the city center, places where they could simply be two people enjoying each other's company. He learned the details of her life in America, met her friend Sophia, heard stories about the struggles of building a life from nothing in a foreign country. Ariana, in turn, was introduced to Pierce's world gradually. She met Maya, who regarded her with cautious curiosity before slowly warming to her presence. She attended small gatherings with Pierce's friends Nathan and Connor, who welcomed her with enthusiasm that suggested they had been hoping someone would crack Pierce's armor for years. But maintaining secrecy proved increasingly difficult. Pierce wanted to be open about their relationship, wanted to claim Ariana publicly as his partner. She hesitated, worried about the scrutiny that would come, worried that her past might somehow catch up with her and endanger what they were building together. The crisis came from an unexpected direction. Ariana's father, who had never stopped searching for his rebellious daughter, finally located her in the United States. He appeared at her apartment one evening, flanked by security, demanding that she return to Greece and fulfill her family obligations. The marriage he had arranged years ago was still waiting, he informed her. Her disobedience had been tolerated long enough. Ariana refused, standing in her doorway with her spine straight and her voice steady, telling her father that she would not be controlled, would not sacrifice her life to his ambitions. He threatened her, threatened to make her life difficult, to destroy her career, to ensure she regretted her defiance. Then he left, leaving Ariana shaking with adrenaline and old fear. She called Pierce, and he came immediately, finding her huddled on her couch, the strong woman he knew, reduced to the frightened girl she had once been. He held her while she cried, while she told him everything about her past that she had held back before. When she finished, Pierce was quiet for a long moment, processing all she had revealed. Then he made her a promise. He would protect her. He would use every resource at his disposal to ensure her father could not hurt her. He would hire lawyers, security, whatever was needed. And he told her he loved her, the words coming more easily than he had expected, feeling right in a way that nothing else had in years. Ariana looked at him with eyes still wet with tears and told him she loved him too, had loved him almost from the beginning, despite her best efforts to guard her heart. They held each other as night fell outside, two people who had each survived their own forms of trauma, finding in each other the courage to face whatever came next. Pierce made good on his promises. He hired the best attorneys money could buy, building a legal case against Ariana's father should he try to force her return to Greece. He assigned personal security to watch her, ensuring her safety. And he went public with their relationship, appearing with Ariana at charity events and business functions, making it clear to everyone that she was important to him. The revelation caused ripples in Pierce's social circles. Some were supportive, happy to see him finally letting someone in. Others were skeptical, questioning Ariana's motives, wondering if she was another Vanessa in the making. The board of directors raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest, given Ariana's role in auditing the company. Pierce addressed each concern methodically. He was transparent about the relationship, about how it had developed after the audit was substantially complete. He stood by Ariana when gossip columnists tried to dig into her past, when speculation ran rampant about the mysterious Greek woman who had captured the heart of one of the city's most eligible bachelors. For Ariana, the scrutiny was intense and sometimes painful. She was not accustomed to being in the spotlight, had built her life on quiet competence and anonymity. Now photographers followed her to work, society bloggers analyzed her fashion choices, and people she had never met had opinions about her relationship. But Pierce was steady beside her, his hand always finding hers, his presence a constant reassurance. Months passed, and the furor gradually died down. Ariana's father made one more attempt to force her return, but Pierce's attorneys shut it down decisively, making it clear that further harassment would result in legal action. The older man retreated, and Ariana allowed herself to believe that perhaps she was truly free at last. She and Pierce settled into a rhythm, their relationship deepening with each passing day. She kept her own apartment but spent increasing amounts of time at his mansion, slowly making a place for herself in the life he had built. Maya welcomed her fully, grateful to see her brother happy, grateful to have a woman in the house who treated her like an adult rather than a child to be managed. Pierce found himself changing in ways he had not anticipated. Ariana softened some of his harder edges, encouraged him to be more open with his emotions, to trust people more freely. She helped him repair some of the distance that had grown between him and Maya, facilitating conversations that allowed the siblings to truly heal from their shared trauma. One evening, nearly a year after they first met, Pierce took Ariana to the roof garden of his building. He had arranged for it to be transformed into something magical, with thousands of twinkling lights and flowers that filled the air with fragrance. In the center of it all, he knelt on one knee and asked her to marry him, offering a ring that had belonged to his mother. Ariana said yes through happy tears, and Pierce rose to sweep her into his arms, spinning her around under the stars. They kissed as the city sprawled below them, two people who had each been certain they would never trust again, never love again, proving themselves wonderfully wrong. The wedding was held at the country estate that Pierce had inherited from his parents, a sprawling property called Three Musketeers Farm, because his father and his two best friends had purchased it together years ago. It was a place full of memories, but also a place where new memories could be made. The ceremony was intimate, just family and close friends. Nathan stood as Pierce's best man, with Connor beside him. Maya and Sophia were Ariana's attendants, the four of them having formed their own close bond over the months. The vows were traditional, but when Pierce promised to love and cherish Ariana all the days of his life, his voice shook with emotion that everyone could hear. At the reception, as they danced under strings of lights, Pierce whispered in Ariana's ear that she had saved him, had brought him back to life when he thought he was past redemption. Ariana shook her head, smiling up at him with eyes full of love, and told him that they had saved each other. Some people were meant to find each other, she said, meant to help each other heal. Life continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Ariana discovered she was pregnant 3 months after the wedding, a development that filled Pierce with equal parts joy and terror. He worried about being a father, about repeating mistakes, or failing to live up to his own father's example. Ariana calmed his fears with patience and love, reminding him that they would figure it out together, that he was already proving himself capable of so much more than he believed. Their son was born on a rainy spring morning, a healthy baby boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's grey eyes. They named him Cain, and Pierce held his son with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the fragility and perfection of this tiny life they had created. He made silent promises to this child, vows to be present and loving, to provide not just material comfort, but emotional security, to be the father his own had been before tragedy cut those years short. Maya graduated from college and married Connor in another beautiful ceremony at the farm. She opened a patisserie with his help, fulfilling a dream she had nurtured for years. The place became hugely successful, her talent and his business acumen combining to create something special. Watching his sister flourish, Pierce felt pride mixed with the bittersweet awareness that his parents would have been so proud of the woman she had become. Nathan and Sophia had their own family, and their son Gale became Cain's constant playmate. The Three Musketeers farm transformed once again, from a place of wild bachelor parties and excess to a family gathering spot, complete with playground equipment and child-safe spaces. Pierce sometimes thought about those early days. The person he had been before loss and betrayal shaped him into someone harder and more closed off. He did not miss that version of himself, realized now that those years of supposed freedom had actually been a kind of prison. Ariana's mother came to visit from Greece, making the journey over her husband's objections. The older woman wept when she held her grandson, apologizing to Ariana for not having been stronger, for not protecting her daughter from her father's domineering ways. Ariana forgave her, understanding now as a mother herself how complicated family love could be, how sometimes the choices available were all imperfect. Pierce's relationship with his mother-in-law was cordial but careful. He saw echoes of the woman his wife might have become if she had stayed in Greece, someone worn down by years of subjugation. He ensured she was comfortable during her visits, that she wanted for nothing, but he also made certain she understood that Ariana's life was her own now, not subject to anyone's control. At Cain's 4th birthday party, held at the farm on a perfect summer day, Pierce stood with Nathan and Connor watching their children play. They joked about how different their lives were from those wild days of youth, when their parties had featured very different entertainment and guests. None of them missed it, they agreed. Those experiences had been fun in the moment, but ultimately empty, providing pleasure but not meaning. Maya announced at the party that she was pregnant, her face glowing with happiness as Connor stood beside her with his arm around her waist. The news was celebrated by everyone. Another generation of this chosen family coming into the world. Pierce hugged his sister tight, thinking about their parents, wishing they could see all of this, all the beauty that had grown from the ashes of that terrible loss. That night, as the party wound down and guests departed, Pierce and Ariana stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Cain was asleep inside, exhausted from a day of celebration. Maya and Connor had just left, and Nathan and Sophia were putting Gale in the car for the drive home. Ariana leaned against Pierce's chest, his arms wrapped around her from behind, and asked if he was happy. He tightened his hold on her, pressing a kiss to her temple, and told her that happy did not begin to cover what he felt. Grateful, blessed, complete, those were closer to the truth. He told her that she had taught him to love again, to trust again, to believe in the possibility of happiness even after loss and betrayal. She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. She reminded him that he had done the same for her, had given her safety and love and a family when she had been alone in a foreign country with nothing but determination and hope. They had healed each other, she said, had been brave enough to risk their guarded hearts for the possibility of something real. They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had each sworn they would never love again, who had built walls around their hearts for protection, who had been certain that vulnerability was too dangerous to ever attempt. They had been wrong, gloriously wrong, and the life they had built together was proof that sometimes the greatest risk yields the greatest reward. Pierce pulled back enough to look into Ariana's eyes, seeing in them his future, his home, his reason for everything. He called her his honeypot, a nickname she rolled her eyes at but secretly loved, and she laughed that warm laugh that still made his pulse quicken, even after years together. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, countless points of light in the darkening sky. Somewhere inside the farmhouse, their son slept peacefully, surrounded by love and security. Maya and Connor were driving home to their own life, their own dreams coming true. Nathan and Sophia, Eduardo and Melissa, all of them building lives full of meaning and connection. Pierce Whitmore, who at 25 had been drowning in responsibility and certain he would never trust again, who at 30 had still been guarding his heart against any possibility of real intimacy, now at 35 stood on the porch of his family's farm with his wife in his arms and his son sleeping inside and his sister about to have her own child. And he felt something he had not felt since before his parents died. He felt whole. He felt at peace. He felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly who he was meant to be with. Ariana whispered that she loved him, the words as powerful now as they had been the first time she said them. Pierce whispered back the same declaration, adding that he would love her always, forever, for the rest of their lives and beyond. She smiled, that radiant smile that had first captured his attention all those years ago in a conference room where she was supposed to be auditing his company, and instead had audited his heart, finding it not bankrupt as he had believed, but simply waiting for the right person to invest in it. They went inside together as full darkness fell, hand in hand, ready for whatever the future would bring, knowing that whatever challenges arose, they would face them together. The CEO, who had refused to love again, had learned the most important lesson of his life, that love was not a weakness, but a strength, not a vulnerability, but a foundation, not a risk to be avoided, but a gift to be cherished. And in learning that lesson, in opening his heart to the Greek woman who had walked into his life with fire in her eyes and integrity in her soul, Pierce Whitmore had finally, truly, completely come home.